When I first started playing Minecraft, I never thought my builds could look like this. I never imagined that I'd be able to create in a way that feels like a work of art. And that's because I treat my world like it is a work of art. Like it's a giant, limitless canvas for myself to express myself in. Minecraft builds are not basic structures that are only used for their functionality. Instead, they decorate the world one build at a time. Building in your Minecraft world becomes a lot more enjoyable and meaningful when you treat each build as its own project. Gathering references, doing research, planning, testing, and trying out block palettes, everything. These are all aspects that make building feel more like an art project, like you're the artist creating the build, designing it entirely, not following some pre-made tutorial. Designing your own builds feels rewarding. It's something that you created from nothing. Except not entirely from nothing, because looking online for inspiration, or in the real world looking at buildings, architecture, landscapes, these things inspire us to create. And like an artist, you can combine all of these aspects together and create a build that really feels unique, like it's your voice speaking through the build. Before you even begin, it's important to come up with a clear idea of what it is that you want to create. What specific direction that you want to go with your build. What the theme is, what kind of feeling you want to give off. These are all things that an artist would ask themselves. It's important to ask yourself a lot of these questions in the planning phase to help point you in a clear direction. It helps get the ideas flowing, and it can really save you a lot of time later from fixing mistakes. You can ask yourself more practical questions too, like if you have enough of a certain block that you want to build with, if you need to gather more, or maybe you need to build a farm for it first. I know for one of my builds, my community center, I built with dark prismarine before I really used my guardian farm. I had one, but it was broken and I had to fix it. But instead I gathered from multiple ocean monuments, which was fun, but you could also use a farm if you want an easier way of getting the materials. In any art project, it's often useful to create a board of references that you're either inspired by, or they provide some sort of practical information that you can reference to make a more accurate build, something more realistic. The references that inspire you are simply ones that you can use to help evoke the feeling in the build. And this is all just an artistic way of saying that the colors or shapes in an image that you reference, you want to implement in your build. Now, I'm not saying that you should copy. I really wouldn't suggest that. But maybe there's a roof in a building that you saw that you want to build in your build. Then that might be something that you want to reference. Maybe another roof that you see, you want to use the color. You can mishmash references together if you want and create something that nobody would tell if you used a specific reference for, because it's borrowing from all sorts of different sources. So like I said, I wouldn't say to copy any one specific image unless you're building as practice, but if you want to create something that really feels more unique, then I would suggest pulling from many different reference sources. So like you could use one for the roof, one for the walls, one for the color scheme, maybe one for the landscaping. And this is just a house as an example, but it really works with any build. It even works with terraforming. I've referenced lots of images for my zoo, which I've been building recently. So in my mega taiga area that I've been building lately, I've referenced all sorts of different environments that exist in real life. Of course, you can also reference builds in Minecraft, but I really would recommend not to reference existing builds too closely, because you can get carried away in copying them, because, well, if it's a build that you're inspired by, then it probably does work already, and you're not really solving any problems by copying it entirely. But you can copy like details. If there's like a tree in a build that you really like, then maybe you can reference that, or a design for a table. It's a skill that any professional artist does, is to combine all sorts of different references and use them to guide yourself in creating a build that uses multiple different sources of inspiration and reference. For the more practical references, like the trees that I referenced were redwood trees that I referenced from the forests in British Columbia in Canada. And this was mainly for the aesthetics, so like the color. They're more of an orangey reddish color, hence the name. Of course, there's also the scale, which I try to get somewhat close to real life. These trees tend to get enormous, so the scale that I built was actually a bit on the smaller side. They do definitely get larger, and this was just more of a creative choice because I didn't want to make them too big to overshadow any of the other enclosures that I built. So yeah, I would say that these are all reasons why I would suggest using references in your builds and really studying what you like about each reference and not simply copying them. This isn't meant to be a building tutorial where I teach you to do this trick and your builds will instantly be better, because that's not the case. If you only start referencing and drawing inspiration, then your builds might not look that great at first. It is a skill to develop, but it's a skill worth developing because you will notice that you will improve and your builds will feel more aesthetically pleasing and artistic. And overall, I think the build process becomes a lot more enjoyable as a result. When you enter the planning phase of your build, it can be valuable to mess around and creative and play with your ideas and put them to the test. Nothing you build is concrete and meant to help you explore what works and what doesn't. Experiment and see what blocks work when resources aren't an issue. You can easily place and move around things without spending hours in survival rebuilding. Again, this is mainly for the larger builds. For a smaller build, you don't always have to plan in a creative copy, but just know that anytime you experiment in survival and you decide to go back on your decision, then it does take time to take everything down and try something different. So just keep that in mind. For the smaller builds, it's not much of an issue, but the larger builds, you'll end up thanking yourself, I think, by planning it in creative. And I wouldn't say to plan entirely in a creative world. I know for me, I don't tend to build the interiors in Creative, I think of building interiors more as solving a puzzle to build with the space that's available. Of course, I'm pretty good at this, I would say, and so if it does help to plan even the interiors in Creative, then you can absolutely do that. I think whatever works for you, then you should do it. Every step from here, though, gets harder to change, so it's important to make sure that you're happy with your designs. When you reach the point in your build where all the big shapes are filled in, you can finally start adding the details. Now, this part's one of my favorites in a build, and it can really make a build start to feel alive. From here, I like to play around with creative uses of decorations in my builds and really use them in creative ways. If you've reached the detailing stage of your build, then the main shapes should already be established, so you don't have to worry about any of that. This is more like in an ice cream, it's the cherry on top. It's polishing the build and not fixing any major mistakes. The detailing is just making it look a bit more presentable, and you can even use blocks in creative ways, like I said, and add details in your builds that if anyone were to stop and admire your build, they might notice and appreciate the detail that you put into it. At the end of the day, though, this isn't meant to be a build tutorial. I want to challenge you to think more about your builds and think differently. Think of them more as art projects that you can use as an opportunity to express your inner creativity. So, before you start placing blocks for your next build, think about the artistic process and come up with a solid plan for how you can use it to build in a more enjoyable way. Your builds will start to look more like works of art, and I guarantee you'll look back on them and feel proud that you're able to accomplish that you're able to express your voice in this beautiful game. I'd like to thank you all for watching today's Minecraft discussion video. I've been having a lot of fun making these videos and sharing my thoughts with you all. I'm really glad to have joined this community and gotten to know so many of the wonderful creators that I'm surrounded by. So if you like the video, then it would mean a lot to me if you could like and maybe subscribe, but that's up to you. With all that being said though, again, thank you all for watching, and I will hopefully see you all in the next one.